Good evening, Valerie Ling here. I am coming to you after a very full day at work. It's normally not that, it's not common for me to be in the practice for beyond 3 o'clock, but for various reasons, today was a lot of things happening and checking in with some of the psychologists at the practice, and we were reviewing what we call 90-day plans, where we actually each generally, not everybody, but most of us have got a 90-day plan where we're tracking some things, and one of it is on growth and just how we're doing in the burnout space, being psychologists ourselves. I thought I would share with you a conversation because I guess I didn't realize that maybe this was new pieces of information that I was sharing with my teammate. And I thought, well, if they hadn't heard it before, it's highly likely that I haven't really shared it in a public space before. And that is the idea. Well, the conundrum is, what do you do when you work in caring for people as a profession, and you have loads of people interaction, and then you've got your weekend and you feel like you want to catch up on a bunch of things, including people and relationships and conversations, but you're realizing that you don't have the capacity to have any more conversations. I would add that if you professionally work and care for people, and you've also got dependents, whether they're elderly parents or you volunteer elsewhere to care for people, or your kids or whatever, that you probably have a very full bucket of caring for people and holding people's emotional material. And so what I was actually sharing today was probably just practically what I have found useful. So when your bucket of emotions is already very full from the week, in terms of caring for other people, there's no space for your own emotions. And so principle number one would be, therefore, you need to make space for your own emotions to come forth. And so therefore your weekends really does need to consist of emptying that bucket of everybody else's emotions and making sure that yours come to the surface so that you can start making sense of them and untangling them and not holding on to other people's emotions. So that's principle number one. You've got to make space for your own emotions to come to the surface. How do you do this? Principle number two, very disciplined and very intentionally. Just like you've got rather regular rhythms for how you eat and what you eat and you exercise and all of that, you also need really regular discipline for actually decompressing and recharging. And so some of the things that I shared about my own practice in terms of what I do after a full day like this, for example, I very often find that I need something to be passing through my brain that can help me to circuit break the conversations and the things that I've had in the day. And that can be different for different people. For me, music is very effective, as is reading, as is doing something quite sensory like cooking or baking, or something that I actually have to use my brain to process information, that's intentional. For me, music does it because I have a background in music, and so when I listen to music, I'm actually thinking about the music. It's actually like a message when I listen to music. And so I'm in my car right now. Before I head home, I know the most effective thing for me to do is to actually put on some music, and today just feels like a blues and jazz kind of day, and so that's what's going to go on. So that principle is, what works best for you to fill up your mind so that you can circuit break. And I don't mean about busying it, but just as a circuit breaker, how can you actually just kind of switch your mind into a different gear? By switching your mind into a different gear, then it allows for you to then move into the next phase, which is a very common thing we say, but much harder to do, which is a mindful state, which is actually really just being very present focused. Because I'm a high activity, high energy individual, I find it very difficult to do mindful practice just sitting down. I have to do mindful practice by engaging in things. So that could be basically doing the washing up or washing my hands, or folding the laundry, or whatever. But anything that's kind of repetitive, or even kind of being with Teddy the cavoodle at home sometimes is really helpful for me as well. When I'm in a particular presence of mind, like if I'm able to actually do the mindful practice without something or an activity, what I actually find really helpful is to be outdoors in nature. So if I'm actually sitting down and just attending to my five senses, what am I hearing? Very often there are birds. What am I seeing in terms of what's in the garden? What am I smelling, etc., etc., is a very helpful practice. Principle number 3 is know that you have limits then on the weekend when you're recharging and recovering to actually do a bunch of other people-based things. And this is a very, very difficult thing to make a decision on, and yet so very necessary. It's actually being aware how much capacity you actually have to have a lot of parties or coffees or phone calls or messaging. You kind of have to be aware of where your capacity is, particularly if you work full-time as a counselor or a psychologist. You may not have very much capacity on the weekend to actually have more human interaction. And so what I've actually said, what I was sharing, is that for me, I have quite an intentional plan for the year. There are about 5 people that I know that I'm intentionally going to be spending time with, and I know that they're the ones that I will say yes to. I also have some intentional ways of figuring out what activities are going to be meaningful through the year, right? So what are the committed activities I'm going to have in the week, right? So I think about, how many church services I can go to, how many groups I can belong to during the week, to basically be very intentional to know how much of that I can actually tolerate. And the final thing that we talked about is the intentionality of a growth plan, because in our practice next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about this. It's the intentionality then of actually having on your plan for next year the types of things that are just going to be fun and can be your go-to, right? Especially when you're feeling burdened and kind of what we call ruminating over issues, people's issues. I find it really helpful to have a go-to things that I'm learning, and it really engages my brain. So I talked about how one year I just wanted to master how to make macarons, and there were just too many macarons, and so I found a 1-egg recipe, and that was my thing, just a 1-egg recipe. One year we were trying to figure out how to make a bunch of mug recipes, whether they were brownies or cakes, and that was it, or a music piece, or gardening. This year for me was, trying to figure out, what is this deal called gardening? And I really, really discovered that I quite like going to Bunnings and seeing the power tools. That was a discovery. So, on your growth plan, it's like things that you've never done before that will require some learning, some laughing, and some intentionality of your mind as you're acquiring this new knowledge or skills. It can be a really helpful way as well to circuit break when your mind is just constantly churning the activities of the day. All right, it's time for me to put my blues and jazz on and drive home. See you later.